Y'all are going to make me wish we had a program every night. Good evening, everyone. I'm Mary Pat Higgins. I'm not paying them. But I'm the president and CEO of the museum, and it is such a pleasure to welcome you all here tonight for our program, Enemies of the State, Nazi Persecution of LGBTQ plus people. As always, I'd like to start by thanking our generous sponsor, and tonight it's Match Group, and we have some representatives from Match here, I believe. Thank you so much for supporting tonight's program. Your continued partnership with the museum and ongoing support means so much to us. I'd also like, let's thank Match. Help me thank Match. I'd also like to thank our community partners for this program, Dallas After School, Dallas LGBT Bar Association, Equality Texas, Green Hill School, the Legacy Senior Communities, LGBT Chamber of Commerce, Remembering Black Dallas, the Resource Center, Southwest Jewish Congress, and Temple Emmanuel. And as always, I'd like to say a big thank you to our board members, our volunteers, and our museum members who are here with us this evening. We couldn't do this work without you, and I'm so grateful for your partnership and help with all we do. So this evening, we are very pleased to welcome Dr. Jake Newsome, an award-winning scholar of German and American LGBTQ history, and the founder and director of the Pink Triangle Legacies Project, a grassroots initiative that honors the memory of the Nazis' queer victims and carries on their legacy by fighting homophobia and transphobia today through education, empowerment, and advocacy. I think we need him here in Texas more than California, where he is. Dr. Newsome is the author of Pink Triangle Legacies, Coming Out in the Shadow of the Holocaust, which traces the transformation of the Pink Triangle from a Nazi concentration camp badge into a global symbol of LGBTQ plus pride. And I have to steal his thunder and brag that we have the first pink triangle on display in our museum that Dr. Newsome has ever seen in person. So yay for our museum. We'll, as always, have time for questions at the end of tonight's program, so write your questions on a note, and our team will come around and pick up your questions, and we'll do our best to answer as many questions as possible. And now it's my honor to welcome Dr. Jake Newsome.
All right. Well, thank you for that warm welcome, and thanks to all of you for showing up on a Monday evening of all nights. It's really great to see y'all. It's also really great to be in a place where I can say y'all and people don't look at me funny. I do live in San Diego now, but I'm originally from Georgia, so every now and then a y'all slips out. But it's great to see, as I said, so many folks here. I know that it is a really busy time of the year, and so I appreciate you taking the time to join us here this evening for some shared learning. I do want to thank the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum for the invitation to come speak and honor LGBTQ History Month by sharing the history of the Nazis' LGBTQ victims. I also want to thank especially Caroline Fangman and Izzy. They've really been a true pleasure to work with in organizing everything from all of the dates and the trips, and it just made everything run really smoothly. I was really excited to have a few minutes before the event to go through the exhibit. And as was mentioned, I was really extra excited to get here because I knew that y'all's museum here has, to my knowledge, at least the first real pink triangle that I've been able to see in person, and it's on view right upstairs. So if you haven't had a chance, make sure you come back and go find it. Now, I never learned about the Holocaust until college. I'm not Jewish, and so I didn't learn about the history through family stories, and we unfortunately didn't learn about the history in high school. I think we learned about World War II, and yeah, some really bad stuff happened. That was really about it. And so when I went to college, I took my first course on Holocaust history. It was one of those, I just needed some course to fill my schedule that time, and I took it, and it really changed my world. So I spent the rest of my college career taking every single course on the Holocaust, Nazi Germany, World War II that I possibly could. And of course, after the end of those 4 years, like any good naive college student, I thought, I know every single thing that there is to know about the Holocaust. But after those 4 years, it suddenly occurred to me that I hadn't learned anything about the folks that we would today recognize and call members of the LGBTQ community. And I was especially frustrated at myself at that time for really never stopping to ask my professors or even myself what happened to people like me during the years of the Holocaust. Now, this is a topic that historians, politicians, journalists, and even members of the public forcibly ignored and silenced for decades. It wasn't even until the 1990s that information based on archival research became more readily available in English. And I believe that all of you who are here this evening understand just how important it is to remember the past. Right? The Nazis' LGBTQ victims deserve to be remembered. Their suffering deserves to be acknowledged. And in telling their stories, we honor their lives and their memory in death. Now, the history, though, of the Nazis' targeting of LGBTQ folks also provides us with a better understanding of Nazi ideology more broadly. It gives us insight into their eugenic worldview that drove their anti-Semitic and racist quest to forge a so-called master race. This history also offers powerful warnings about the dangers of what can happen when homophobia and transphobia are backed by law. Now, I want to begin this evening with the story of a man named Richard Gruna, who you can see here on the huge screen behind me. Born in August of 1903, Richard was born in Flensburg, a small coastal town in northern Germany, to a middle-class family. He was one of 8 children in a Christian home. He knew from early on he was interested in art, and his family supported that. They sent him to an art school, and he even studied for a year at the famous Bauhaus Institute of Art and Design. But Richard also knew from early on that he was gay. And for him, it was impossible to grow up living openly as a gay man in a small conservative hometown. And so a few months before his 30th birthday, he moved to Berlin, the capital city of Germany. Berlin spoke to him for a reason. After Germany's defeat in World War I, the emperor was forced to abdicate the throne, right? And a new democratic form of government was installed in Germany. It was called the Weimar Republic because this new constitution was drafted and then first read in the town of Weimar. And during the Weimar years, minorities in Germany began to fight for and win more political rights. Berlin, again, the capital of Germany, also kind of became an unofficial gay capital of the world. LGBTQ folks from London, New York, Paris, all over the world came to Berlin to experience this new and unprecedented level of visible LGBTQ culture. In Berlin alone, there were over 100 different organizations, restaurants, bars, nightclubs, and cafes for the LGBTQ community. So the one that you can see here on the screen is called the El Dorado. It was the largest and most famous of those nightclubs, and its motto that you can see there on the front facade is that here, it's okay. There was also a thriving LGBTQ print culture. So whether you were interested in politics or arts or the sports or just leisure, you could find a newspaper or a magazine or a pamphlet for you. And we know from and this number always surprises me, from the research that over 1 million people regularly read the LGBTQ press in Germany during these years. Now, Berlin was also a hub for the scientific research on human sexuality and gender. In 1919, the Jewish socialist and gay physician Magnus Hirschfeld established the Institute for Sexual Science in Berlin. This was an organization that was really the first LGBTQ rights organization in the world. And it was especially a forerunner in the understanding of trans communities and trans rights. So what you see here on the screen is actually an example of the work done by the Institute of Sexual Science there in Berlin. It is known, or it was known at the time as a transvestite pass, and these trans certificates could be received by someone like Gerd Cotter, who you can see. Gerd was a trans man born in Berlin, was able to go to Hirschfeld's Institute and essentially get what amounted to a doctor's note that said, you know what, this person, and the wording at the time was clinically trans and therefore should be allowed to present as such openly in public. Gerd was able to take this doctor's note to the Berlin Police Department, which then approved it and essentially acted as a gender-affirming ID card. So Gerd could carry that around and at least in the city of Berlin, be protected from being arrested under the Germans' laws that they used against what they called cross-dressing in public. So you can see, I mean, this is an incredibly vibrant and unique place in the world for LGBTQ folks during the early 20th century. But just because some attitudes were changing in the capital city, it doesn't mean that the laws were. So Germany had a number of different laws, what they called crimes against morality, on the books, including this one that you see here. It was called Paragraph 175, and this was a statute in their criminal code that criminalized so-called unnatural fornication among men. As you can see, it's also the law that criminalized bestiality. They lumped the two together. This had existed since the unification of Germany as a country in 1871. And, you know, you would think, okay, during this really vibrant era of the Weimar years, maybe Germans quit enforcing Paragraph 175. And that was kind of the case. As in Berlin, the police kind of took on a lax attitude to enforcing what they saw as a victimless crime. And so, again, in Berlin, in the capital city, the number of convictions or arrests under Paragraph 175 decreases during these years. But elsewhere in Germany, politicians and local law enforcement and local politicians began telling their constituents that we have to fight against this immorality that's spreading from the capital city. So they began actually ramping up their enforcement of Paragraph 175 during these years. And so even though the Weimar Republic has this reputation for being incredibly open and a kind of a great time for LGBTQ folks, you really have to know that it's limited to Berlin and some of the other larger cities like Munich and Frankfurt. Because actually during this time period, the number of Paragraph 175 convictions more than doubles. Now, by the late 1920s and early 1930s, the Nazi Party is gaining support. They're gaining followers. They really go from a small fringe party to, by 1932, the largest political party in parliament. They campaigned on a promise to be the ones that they were going to clean up Germany and establish a racially pure national community. Right? And according to Nazis, there were going to be many groups within the German nation that would not be allowed to belong to this national community. So their primary enemies were the Jews, right? And the Nazis believed that Jewish people were not just a different culture or different religion, but they were fundamentally a different biological race. And it goes without saying that they felt that the Jews were an inferior race. But the Nazis also believed that two other groups, the Roma and Sinti, as well as people with disabilities, were so-called tainted down to their blood. Right? They were biologically flawed and could not be cured. They were irredeemable. And so the Nazis' policies against these groups radicalized. They evolved from trying to remove them from German society and then from German land and ultimately from life itself. Now, the Nazis also viewed other groups as enemies of the state, but they believed that these other groups, you could force them to change their behaviors or change their beliefs and then be reintegrated back into society. And so those included like political opponents, Jehovah's Witnesses, and even members of the LGBTQ community, among others. Now, the Nazis believed, as you can tell from this quote here, that they needed to understand and then control human sexuality. Right? For them, literally, sex was the key to reproducing the so-called master race. And so they implemented a number of policies that controlled who could have sexual relations with whom. Now, the Nazis did not believe that people were born LGBTQ. They said that the, quote, homosexual lifestyle was a choice. In fact, they believed that it was a vice that could affect anyone or everyone. And so for them, for the Nazis, homosexuality was not just a moral or religious sin, it was a threat to the German birth rate, because they believed that LGBTQ folks stole the next generation of children from the fatherland. The Nazis were also, and actually they're not just unique to the Nazis at this point, the Americans as well, believed that homosexually inclined men, if allowed into the government, were going to be more loyal to each other than to the leader of the government and would essentially form a state within a state. And so for the Nazis, as you can see here on this newspaper clipping, this is the front page from March of 1937, the underlined section in red is translated as "they're enemies of the state." And so now they are essentially changing the script and talking about LGBTQ folks not just as a threat to the birth rate or a threat to the so-called master race, but now they're a political threat to the everyday running of the government. Now, because the Nazis believed that homosexuality was contagious, their first step was to remove it from the public. They wanted to remove this temptation from the public eye. And so, as I said, the Nazis become the largest party in 1932. January 30th of 1933, Hitler's appointed chancellor. And unfortunately, Richard Grunow, who we started the story with, moves to Berlin in February. So just a matter of weeks after Hitler is appointed chancellor. And as soon as Richard arrives, he witnesses the closing of all of those LGBTQ organizations across the city. The Nazis pass a law stating that establishments that promote immorality had to be shut down. So really vague wording, but of course that gave them the legal authority to go after, of course, these LGBTQ organizations. At the same time, the Nazis sought to control access to information and purge the nation of so-called un-German literature. So they ramped up their propaganda, right? And they over the radio waves and in newspapers, they claimed that LGBTQ folks were pedophiles who were corrupting the youth and trying to seduce Germany's children into that so-called homosexual lifestyle. They banned all LGBTQ publications, and what you can see here, one of the things that I was surprised and learned about during this research is I'd seen those pictures of the book burnings, anytime that I studied history, but what I didn't know is that the biggest bonfire of book burnings that night in Berlin in May was from a group of college students and stormtroopers who had looted that Institute for Sexual Science that I mentioned earlier. And so they went in and burned over 20,000 books, research materials, unique artifacts, all in the flames that night. And so what you're seeing here on the bottom right is the world's first LGBTQ archive going up in smoke. Now you know what they didn't burn is all of the patient records, right? Like the trans certificates that we saw earlier. So suddenly the Nazis are in possession of stacks and stacks of people's names, addresses. They essentially had a roadmap for finding LGBTQ folks that they would use then to launch their attack on the community. Now the Nazis, you would think inheriting a national anti-gay law would be something that the Nazis would find pretty handy. But unfortunately, for them anyway, they believed that the way that the original wording of paragraph 175, the way it was originally worded, was too constrictive for them. Because that original wording essentially required proof of what the law called intercourse-like acts. And so the number of convictions actually remained relatively low. So in 1935, the same summer and fall months that they're writing the Nuremberg race laws, they decide to amend paragraph 175. And so you can see here the wording of the new version of the law. And I'm not sure if there's any lawyers in the room, but I'm not really sure how you legally define indecency. And honestly, that was exactly the point. They wanted it left broad and vague enough so that any prosecutor or judge could interpret that how they wanted to on a case-by-case basis with the sole explicit goal of trying to convict as many men under the law as possible. Now, again, I keep saying men, right? If you read this version, it says a man who commits indecency. This is not kind of the generic mankind man. They specifically meant men. And at this time that they are amending the law, they debate whether or not they should expand it to include women. But there were several arguments that essentially pushed Nazi lawyers, Nazi policymakers to leave paragraph 175 solely for men. And essentially those were that out of all of the LGBTQ community, the Nazis believed that queer men posed the biggest threat to the state. And that's because simply that in Germany, just like in the rest of the world, it was men who had access to positions of power. Right? It was men who ran the economy, who ran the military, and national politics. So again, the Nazis felt that any so-called perversion or deviance in a man, they had access to the everyday running of the government in a way that women didn't. As if that was not enough, the person who went on to be the Minister of Justice in the Nazi regime stated that, colleagues, we must remember that women are always prepared for sex. And that leaves little room for interpretation. But we have to remember, right, that the central aim of the Nazi government was the creation of a master race. And so the Nazis believed that all women, including lesbians, could be impregnated even by force if necessary, and therefore become useful to the regime. So this law, paragraph 175, this new version, was used against queer men, and I want to give the qualifier that it was used against non-Jewish gay men. Because if you were Jewish and queer or Jewish and trans, the Nazis viewed your Jewishness as the primary crime. Now, the Nazis did not have a specific law that criminalized trans people, but that doesn't mean that they didn't target them. So here I've got two examples for you. Fritz Kitzing, who you see, I guess on the left, was a gender nonconforming person. And they were arrested by the Nazis in 1935 and early into 1936. And in Fritz's police file, the local police office is writing to the Nazi Gestapo, essentially asking for Fritz to be transferred to a concentration camp. And so this is what that local policeman is writing. It says, quote, "Complaints about the shameless going-ons of a transvestite are a danger to the public. So it would be a great service to the public and to the morally depraved person themselves if we sent Kitzing to a concentration camp." Now, for the longest time, that's all I knew about Fritz's story. The trail ran cold after that. But several years later, just a couple of years ago actually, through a kind of coincidence of email contacts, I get in contact with someone whose name is Anna Kitzing. And it turns out Anna is Fritz's great niece. And Anna was able to tell me that Fritz actually survived and went on to have a really long life as an antique dealer in West Berlin, and that the family knew that they were gay. Anna said, we didn't quite know that Fritz also lived as a woman at some times, but that Fritz's family always showed support. So this is it's a history that is continuously unfolding and being written still today. So on the right, you see Liddy Backroff. Liddy was a self-identified trans woman in Berlin, was really well known in the nightlife scene. Liddy was turned in to the police after some citizen went to the Gestapo and said, I've seen a man in women's clothing. He hangs around here. The Nazis picked up Liddy and ultimately did not recognize Liddy's trans identity as legitimate, and so treated Liddy as a cross-dressing homosexual man. So Liddy was actually arrested, convicted under paragraph 175, that law against same-sex acts between men. Now, the one note I want to make before moving on is that I thought when I found this photograph, or the other scholars have found, and when I first saw it, was that maybe this was a studio picture that Liddy had taken. This is her mugshot. And I just love that because I think it tells us a lot about her personality, right? That she, even though she's been arrested and she's saying, okay, you're going to even classify me as something that I'm not, I'm still going to serve looks. So as we saw, women were ultimately not included in paragraph 175, but lesbians did clearly pose a threat to the Nazis' new order. So as I said, the Nazis didn't extend the same level of resources in hunting down lesbians, but they did arrest and torture lesbians when they appeared on their radar. So the Nazi law enforcement officials, whether it was the Gestapo or local police, used a number of different laws, whichever one they thought that could grant a conviction against a lesbian at any point in time. But I also want to point out that the Gestapo, the secret state police, didn't need any law whatsoever to apprehend someone and send them to a concentration camp under so-called preventative detention. So again, two more stories. Here you see Henny Sherman, who was arrested and sent to the Ravensbrück concentration camp for women. On her admittance card, her processing paperwork in Ravensbrück, the official wrote, and we have the handwriting, wrote that she was, quote, a promiscuous lesbian who only went to lesbian bars. He noted that even before noting that she was Jewish. So Henny, unfortunately, did not have a happy ending. Henny was murdered in Ravensbrück in the gas chamber. Now, Ilse Totska, who you also see here, Ilse was turned in by two different people in her life. She was born in Germany. She was Christian. She otherwise was considered Aryan, but she often had a short haircut. She dressed in suits and ties, and so she didn't quite fit into what most folks considered to be normal at the time. And so two different people, one a professor at her college and one a neighbor in her apartment building, both separately turned Ilse into the Gestapo. One told the Gestapo that she had never seen Ilse bring home a man. Another one told the Gestapo that she saw Ilse having an inappropriate relationship with a Jewish woman. Now, the Nazis knew that being a lesbian was not illegal, but of course they started to investigate her. And when they investigated Ilse, they found out actually Ilse continued to break the Nuremberg laws by being friends with, doing work with Jews. She had a lot of Jewish friends in her network, and so that's what piqued the Nazis' interest. And ultimately, they found that if I'm not mistaken, is in the years of the winter from 1942 to 1943, Ilse had helped a Jewish friend escape from Germany into Switzerland. Unfortunately, both of them were apprehended by the Swiss border guards and turned over back to the Nazis. Her friend, Ruth, was sent to Auschwitz, and Ilse was sent to Ravensbrück because she was not Jewish. She was considered ethnically German. But fortunately, both Ilse and her friend Ruth survived the Holocaust. Now, in October of 1936, Heinrich Himmler centralized the Nazis' campaign against homosexuality in a new headquarters in an office that he called the Reich Central Office for Combating Homosexuality and Abortion. And so you can actually see the secret order here on the right that was given to establish this new office. It was located in the headquarters of the Gestapo in Berlin, and so had a massive staff in which they sought to, again, centralize, to federalize the Nazis' ability to identify, track, and then persecute folks who were LGBTQ, but also women who were seeking abortions. So the name itself shows you that for the Nazis, reproductive issues and LGBTQ issues were bound together, right? That they both posed a threat to the German birth rate. So out of this central office, the Nazis compiled what became known as pink lists. So these were the lists of names and addresses of men who were known to be, or at least even suspected of being gay. For the most part, these pink lists focus solely on men, but we do have a rare few examples of women's names also being on the pink lists. Now, police officers from this Reich Central Office also started using the tactic of entrapment, or going undercover in plain clothes to areas, to parks, to bars known to be locales for LGBTQ folks, and then they would try to catch gay folks in the act. And they also they got really good at using torture. So if they could even find one gay person, they would torture them into giving up the names of other LGBTQ friends in their circle. Then the Nazis would use those names and that information to either make individual arrests, or, as what became more and more common, to make large-scale raids all throughout the country. Now, one of the things, I would say the thing that surprised me the most in doing this research is just how wildly popular the Nazis' homophobic and transphobic policies were among the ordinary citizens in Germany. Ordinary citizens turned in queer and trans people to the Nazis in truly staggering numbers. In fact, 1/3 of all the cases of paragraph 175 arrests that went and ultimately resulted in convictions were the result of civilian denunciations. And that was unfortunately the case with Richard Grune, right, the artist who we started the talk with. Right, he was in Berlin, and again, all of these meeting places were beginning to be shut down. Richard came from a well-to-do family, had a nice big apartment, and so he started hosting parties and get-togethers for his friends there in his apartment. Unfortunately, the attendees of those parties spent the party noting the names of everyone who was there. And we don't know her motivation, but we do know that she turned over a long list of names to the Nazis. And right before Christmas, 1934, Richard, along with 70 other men who were at the parties, were arrested by the Nazis and sent to prisons. At one point, the number of denunciations grew so drastically in Hamburg that a newspaper there actually ran a front page story asking people to quit turning in gay people to the local police because the local police were overwhelmed. So, right, fascism is not just a top-down organization of government policies. It creates an environment where people feel empowered to enact violence against already dehumanized communities. But LGBTQ folks responded to the Nazis' violent policies in a number of ways. Many went into hiding or entered into marriages of convenience. Some left the country. One story that I just makes me laugh and makes me love them even more is that a group of lesbian friends in Berlin founded a fake rowing club so that they would have an alibi for why they continued to meet with each other along the beautiful river there in Berlin. Here you see Frida Belinfanta. She was a Dutch musician in Amsterdam. And so after the Nazi invasion of the Netherlands in 1940, Frida essentially joins the underground resistance. She joins a group and she uses her talents to help forge ID cards, identification papers for Jews there in the Netherlands. However, she realizes that they have a problem. Her and her comrades have a problem. Apparently, the Dutch are really, really good at keeping paperwork. Like they're really organized. And so in the Dutch Central Registry Office, they have copies of the originals of every single ID card. And so at any given time, the Nazis could simply take someone's ID off the street, match it against the original, and see that clearly one was a forgery, right? And so her comrades are thinking, oh man, they've by that point made almost 100,000 fake ID cards for Jews. And so Frida says, well, you know what we've got to do? We've got to get rid of those originals. And so they all look around and they're like, okay, Frida, how should we do that? And she says, we've got to blow them up. And that's exactly what they did. Her and her group, which I will now add, it was a group almost entirely made up of LGBTQ folks. So here we have this little queer resistance group helping hundreds of thousands of Jews, deciding that they, the fashionable gays, one was a tailor, he made fake police uniforms, and they snuck into the registry office disguised as police. They pulled the fire alarm so that everyone was out. They didn't want to kill anyone. And then they blew it up. They blew the building up, and they destroyed 800,000 identification cards. Frida, you can see here on the bottom right, decided that she knew at that point that the Nazis would be looking for a woman named Frida Belinfanta. So she decided just not to be a woman named Frida Belinfanta for a while. She actually dressed up as a man. She talks about going to a barber, getting a haircut. She went when she had a cold, so her voice would be a little bit deeper. And she says that her disguise worked so well that she actually passed her own mother in the street twice and was never recognized. Unfortunately, her friend and the leader of this LGBTQ resistance group was a man named Willem Arendeus. He was caught by the Nazis pretty soon after. They tortured him, but he never gave up the names of anyone else in the group. And he was found guilty in a show trial and then sentenced to execution. In his final words before he was executed, he asked his lawyer to please let the world know that homosexuals aren't cowards. Now, in total, the Nazis arrested over 100,000 men under paragraph 175, and over half of those were convicted. And you might be asking, why not all, right? Why is that the conviction record or the conviction rate only about half? And it's because if you were arrested under paragraph 175 and it was your first offense, and you were otherwise a good German, all right, a good German man, you were Aryan, you were not Jewish, maybe you served in the military, otherwise you seemed to be a pretty good Nazi, they showed you a little bit of leniency. They especially showed you leniency if you were under 21, because they felt essentially that these are just things that boys do from time to time. So, and you have to remember that the official policy, the Nazis' official policy against LGBTQ folks, men and women, was to cure them, was to re-educate them and then reintegrate them back into society. So I want to point out then, just to make that clear, this is not an option for Jewish people, for people with disabilities, the Roma and Sinti. So we don't yet have comparable statistics for the number of lesbians or transgender people that were arrested. Like, as I said, they were arrested under a number of different laws, but scholars are currently working on that. So pretty soon, I hope that we will have comparable statistics for those groups. But the Nazis considered men who needed quote-unquote harsher therapy were sent to camps. And these were any man that they were arrested more than once under paragraph 175. And so that equated to somewhere between 7,000 and 10,000 so-called repeat offenders. Now, just a quick reminder that the Nazis' concentration camp system existed outside the bounds of the German legal system. Right? These were entire camps, essentially prisons that didn't answer to any court or law enforcement system. They only answered to the SS and Himmler. So when prisoners arrived in these camps, they were marked with a color-coded triangle badge that announced their so-called crime to the guards, but also to other inmates themselves. And so you can see here on this particular chart that came from, if I'm not mistaken, Dachau, red triangles were for political prisoners, green triangles were for so-called common criminals, purple triangles for Jehovah's Witnesses. The black triangle was for so-called asocials, or the Nazi word for social deviants. And on some charts, including this one, it's also labeled as Arbeitsscheu or work shy. So these are for folks who didn't fit in to society according to the Nazi standards and essentially couldn't put their body to work for the master race. And those who are marked with the black triangle included folks like unhoused people, people struggling with alcoholism, sex workers, what the Nazis called chronically unemployed, as well as lesbians and transgender people. Now, the men who were sent to the camps for being gay were marked with a pink triangle, like this one that's right upstairs. We do know from the history that there are some examples of gay men that were marked with a green triangle for being a criminal or red as a political opponent, but largely dependent on what supplies were available at that particular camp at any given day. And because the Nazis didn't recognize trans identities as legitimate, we also know that some trans women were sent to the camps as so-called cross-dressing homosexual men, and therefore were also marked with the pink triangle. Now, the horrors that faced the prisoners with the pink triangle were similar to the horrors that other prisoners faced in a lot of ways, except that homophobia didn't stop at the barbed wire. Right, so the prisoners with the pink triangle had to face discrimination not just from guards, but from their own fellow inmates as well. We know that gay prisoners were often isolated in their own barracks. They were given harder work details or less food, and the Nazis felt again that this was meant to try to reorient them. They felt that hard work was a man's job. And so if you put these men into hard work details, it would somehow reorient them back to being straight. We also know that according to an order by Heinrich Himmler in 1944, they set up brothels in all of the concentration camps, or in many of the concentration camps, and gay prisoners were some of those that were forced to go to the brothel, where they were forced to have sex with female prisoners to what Himmler called learn the joys of the opposite sex. And if these prisoners were deemed cured or they performed well enough, they had a small chance of being released. And the Nazis judged that performance by just literally watching through holes in the wall. We also know that many gay prisoners were subjected to incredibly violent and intrusive medical experiments that were really the Nazis saying, well, maybe if these men aren't being cured, there's a biological factor in this. And so the Nazis started spending money trying to find a so-called biological cure for homosexuality. Now, this social exclusion from the other inmates meant that the Pink Triangle prisoners often had little or no access to the the black market that existed in these camps often, which means they might not be able to get extra scraps of food, which could mean the difference between life or death on any given day. Now, I want to show a really brief clip of testimony from a woman named Margot Heumann. She was a Jewish lesbian survivor. She was 15 years old when she and her family were sent to Theresienstadt and then to Auschwitz. But Auschwitz is where she met another Jewish teenage girl whose name was Dita, and it was there that they fell in love. So in this clip, Margot is talking about what that love meant for her and Dita in the camps.
That made life different, yeah. We used to pretend that we were in different places, what we'll do when we get out, fantasize about things, and share things, and care for each other. So we left Auschwitz together too. I don't know. It's something being together with Dita, and we did together. Now we realize we talk about it, because I see her, and we meet at least once a year. Either I go to Toronto or she comes here. Neither one of us would have survived without the other, and we both realize that. Because we gave each other hope and support and love and friendship. And I think that's what makes life worth living.
So that's Margot. As we saw, they both survived, she and Dita, but the social pressure and stigma meant that they couldn't be together after the war, even though they did stay in each other's life all the way until both of them passed away. Margot finally came out as a lesbian to her family at the age of 88. Her daughter said that she knew it all along, though. Margot became the first openly lesbian Jewish Holocaust survivor to give testimony. And she passed away in 2022 at the ripe old age of 94. Now, for non-Jewish gay men in the camps, there was, at least in theory, one way for them to get out. They could try to act like they were cured, right? They could try to hide, to be straight. But if you would not or could not be cured, the Nazis also always reserved more violence. And so here's the story. I want to tell you the quick story of a man named Ernst Pack. He was 49 years old when he was arrested. He had served with honor in World War I. He spoke English and French. He owned a construction business that put a lot of people in jobs. However, when he was arrested, he was sent to Natzweiler concentration camp and then transferred to Flossenburg. Now, Flossenburg officials deemed Ernst Pack a lost cause. They told him that the only way he would leave the concentration camp alive was if he submitted to so-called voluntary castration. So you can see his signature here on the right. He signed this form on February 17th, 1942. Shortly afterwards, the physician performed the procedure, and Ernst was released only after signing another document that I'm sure filled him with dread. It was essentially what was a non-disclosure agreement, and also an addendum at the end stating that just because he had been imprisoned, sentenced, and even castrated, that did not mean that he could not be arrested again. Now, unfortunately, the archive goes cold, and we don't know what happened to Ernst Pack after that. In Flossenburg, the same camp at the same time, is Richard Grune, the artist who we started out with. In April of 1945, the Nazis evacuated Flossenburg and forced the prisoners on a death march as they tried to hide the regime's crimes and potentially use those survivors as bargaining chips. During the chaos, Richard escaped and reunited with his sister. So he survived. But in this case, he was lucky, because despite that official policy of trying to cure and save gay men and reintegrate them back into society, over 2/3 of the men sent to the concentration camps were being gay or murdered in the camps. After the war, Richard said, and I quote, "After I was liberated in 1945, I saw it as my duty to educate people about the concentration camps and the terror of the Third Reich." Of course, he's an artist, and so he wanted to use his skills to help educate people. So he put together a series of nearly 40 drawings into an exhibit and in a portfolio, and he premiered it in Nuremberg as the Nuremberg war trials were happening. But the German public did not want to confront the Nazi crimes in any real detail. But to this day, his exhibit and portfolio, which you can see 3 of here, were the first visual works on the concentration camps that were made available to the public. Now, the Allies defeated Nazi Germany in May of 1945, and suddenly they were left with the task of how to care for the hundreds of thousands of concentration camp survivors. Led by the Americans, the Allies implemented a policy of immediately releasing any prisoners who had been put there based on race, religion, or politics. But they said, you know what, it's really too dangerous for us to release common criminals back into the general population. Perhaps not surprisingly, the Americans and other allies considered gay people to be common criminals. So any Pink Triangle prisoner who still had time left on their sentence at the time of liberation was taken by the Allies from those liberated concentration camps to a nearby prison where they were forced to serve out the rest of their term. At the same time, the Americans and the other Allies are implementing a process of denazification, getting rid of Nazi laws. However, they decide to let the Nazi version of paragraph 175 stay on the books. So when both East and West Germany are created in 1949, both of those countries have the Nazi version of the law written into their criminal code. East Germany, right, the communist country, within a matter of months decides we're getting rid of that. We're going to go back to the original version of the law. But West Germany, our democratic ally in the Cold War, upholds it in court multiple times. And they didn't just uphold it, they used it. So if you remember that chart that I showed you a few slides ago, if you extend it to include the full life of paragraph 175, this is what it looks like. So clearly it goes drastically down at the end of the war, but goes right back up with the creation of West Germany. In total, West Germany arrested 100,000 gay men with the Nazi version of this law between 1949 and 1969. LGBTQ folks had hoped that the defeat of fascism meant freedom for them. But it turns out that democracy, whether it was the Allies or this new democratic country of West Germany, didn't see them as equal or even acknowledge them as victims. It would take queer and trans people decades to fight for that acknowledgement and for justice. Now, Pierre Ciel was a Frenchman who was sent to a concentration camp for being gay during the Nazis' occupation. Reflecting later on in his life about what May of 1945 meant to him, he stated really powerfully that liberation was only for others. For decades after the end of the Nazi regime, societies tried to silence the voices of people like Richard Grune, of Margot Heumann, and Pierre Ciel. But we have to commit to keeping this history alive, to telling this history. Thank you very much. And I would be very happy to answer questions.
Please raise your note cards and our volunteers will come by and get them. I find this so depressing. I mean, it's all depressing, but...
Not very popular at parties.
No. Join the club. Yeah. When I started working here, my children said, "Do we have to talk about genocide at dinner again?" So, oh dear. So we have a couple of questions to start with as we wait for more questions from the audience. So was the sharp decrease in arrests for gay men in 1939 due to the shifting focus to Jewish persecution? Or was it that the outbreak of the war meant that the arrests went way down because they were focused on the war?
Yeah, the Nazis, that's a really good question. Thanks for whoever asked it. The Nazis understood that they could have their ideology on the one hand, but also reality sometimes demanded differences. So that drop in 1939 is the outbreak of World War II, because they could not be sending thousands and thousands of men to prison every year when they also needed thousands and thousands of men in uniform to fight what became a two-front war.
What can you tell us about the Pink Triangle Legacies Project, and how can people get involved?
What a great question. I didn't plant that question, I
No,
promise.
I know.
So we at the Pink Triangle Legacies Project, we're brand new. We just started in January, so I guess we're coming up on our 1 year mark pretty soon. We are dedicated to, number one, first and foremost, preserving the memory of the Nazis' LGBTQ victims. But we believe that the best way to carry on their legacy and honor their memory is to fight against homophobia and transphobia today. So you can go to our website, pinktrianglelegacies.org. You will find a number of free and accessible educational resources that you can either use on your phone, your tablet, your computer. You can download and print off whatever you want to do. You could use it in the classroom. But you can also, on our website, the homepage, there's a tab for Get Involved, and you can find a number of ways that you can get involved with our organization. We exist digitally right now, but we offer a number of paid internships for college students, for example. So if you look at everything we do, whether it's our website or our social media, it's all run by young college-age LGBTQ folks themselves. They're the ones who are helping do the research, make the posts, and then I'm there to help make sure that we get kind of peer-reviewed and make sure that everything that we put out is up to historical standards. But we are doing a number of online events like these in person. So I just invite you to check out our social media or our webpage.
Terrific. Why was the triangle pink? What was that, the origin of that symbol?
That took me, that bothered me for 10 years. I tried to find that answer to that question. And the Nazis were meticulous note keepers, and so I just assumed that somewhere, in some archive, there was going to be like a document where the Nazis said why they chose the specific colors for the triangle badges. And if there ever was such a document, it doesn't exist anymore. It must have been destroyed. And so from all of my consultations with other historians, art historians, what we first thought was that maybe it was a way to humiliate gay men by giving them pink, which was seen as a feminine color. But that's where you have to always talk to your colleagues and learn from them. Art historians told me that no, in the 30s, pink was still considered a boy's color, right? So it had not quite made the shift to being associated with feminine and women, and so then led me down more rabbit holes. And it turns out I thought, well, maybe pink was just kind of a color of the LGBTQ community. Then it turned out, well, in Germany at least, it was lavender was the color associated with the LGBTQ community. And the best answer that we can come up with is that at the time in the 1920s and 1930s, there was a slang or vernacular for male prostitutes who had sex with men were in slang called Rosa-Rota, which would be kind of like pinkies. And that maybe that, the Nazis would have been well aware of that slang, and maybe that was influenced why they chose pink for the color of their triangle. But there's not a hard, definitive answer on that.
That's fascinating, though. What is the climate for LGBTQ rights in Germany today, and when did it shift? We saw that line drop dramatically, right?
Yeah, I think, today, the situation for LGBTQ folks in Germany is pretty good. They've recently passed marriage equality. For a long time, they had kind of civil unions. Now that's officially marriage equality, because I think beginning in the 1970s, when gay activists in Germany, kind of in the wake of Stonewall here in the U.S., started their own gay liberation movement, they not only made specific aims or demands of the time in the 1970s, they also hearkened back and said, look, we're the land of Hirschfeld. Right? Yes, we're the land of the Nazis, but we're also the place where the very first LGBTQ rights organization was birthed. And so they had kind of this national history that they fell back on. And so, as we can see, there was a long struggle as there always is. And you know, to I guess kind of put that in perspective, even when we're talking about this particular history, the gay activists fought from beginning in the 1970s to finally get the German government to acknowledge LGBTQ people as official victims of the Nazi regime. That didn't happen until 2002. And even then, it was only for gay men. To this day, the German government has not acknowledged any other, you know, lesbian or transgender people as victims of the Nazi regime.
What happened to Hirschfeld?
So Hirschfeld was, it's kind of hard for me to imagine a scientist being so popular today. He truly was, I mean, a world famous physician and researcher. So he was away on a national world tour. He was going to New York and Shanghai and, you know, everywhere in between. And so very fortunately for him, he happened to be in France at the time that his institute was ransacked. And he wanted to eventually go back to Germany to rebuild his work, but he was never able to. And so he died in exile on his birthday, unfortunately.
Were there any records left from the institute, or was everything destroyed?
It was, I mean, I don't know what percentage, but it was mostly destroyed. Okay. We have a handful of documents that survived and were found actually in a dumpster in Canada in the 90s because
Wow.
Hirschfeld's boyfriend was a medical student from Shanghai who also was away, and like they took some of their work with them. And so when Hirschfeld passed away, Xiong Li moved to Canada. And anyway, and then unfortunately, whenever he died, someone just threw all this paper in the dumpster. But luckily, literally, someone just stumbled across it and found it and was like, "This might be important." And it's actually material from the Institute for Sexual Science.
Wow. Were there any reparations by Germany to LGBTQ survivors?
So as I said, in 2002, the now unified German government finally apologized and acknowledged them as victims, which again, that finally made them eligible for compensation. Okay. Now, the youngest survivors at that time would have been well into their 80s, right? And you could imagine their entire life they had been told by the Nazi government, the Allies, the West German government, and then for a while by the unified German government that they weren't victims, that they were constitutionally punished for what they were. And so you could probably imagine that apology was seen as too little too late. And so no survivor came forward. Wow. And so to this day, the German government has not issued a single penny of reparations to LGBTQ victims.
Do we know if there are any of the LGBTQ victims still alive today?
To my knowledge, there are no survivors who were persecuted during the Nazi regime for being gay, but there are dozens, I don't know, hundreds, thousands of survivors who were persecuted with the Nazi law in West Germany after the war. Okay. Right, and so they're still alive.
What was the climate like for LGBTQ people in other Nazi-occupied countries? What happened to them?
I think that's definitely an area that needs further research. As a rule, the Nazis did not bring paragraph 175 with them to the occupied territories because they essentially said, look, we're occupying these countries of subhumans anyway, and that of course they're going to indulge in this vice. It's, you know, they're not as evolved as we are. Mm-hmm. And so they use the law really to try to protect their, you know, so-called master race.
Okay. Is Grun's portfolio preserved, and are there any images that represent queer people?
So, yes, it is preserved. His entire collection is at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. Okay. And so they are digitized. If you go to their website, you can see, I think it's all 40 of them. And if you're ever in D.C., you can go out to the archive and see them for yourself. out of the lithographs that he created, I'm not an art analyst, but there's none that have explicitly kind of same-sex subjects. It's more so like his experience as a prisoner more generally.
In your studies, have you researched when historically anti-LGBTQ laws first came into existence? So before the Holocaust, have you? You said 1871 for 175, right? But
yeah, it really is in that. What would that be in the 19th century that a lot of at least Western or European countries kind of shift from viewing homosexuality through the lens of religion explicitly or solely through the lens of religion to trying to codify it into, at least on the surface, secular law. And so several countries, including Germany and Great Britain, passed national anti-gay laws. France is an exception. They actually got rid of their anti-gay laws during this time. In the U.S., we'd never had a national law like paragraph 175, but every single state had its own anti-gay law.
States' rights. Okay, so let's see. Thank you all. There's some great questions, and I appreciate all your questions. Is the play Cabaret in any way accurate in its depiction of the Weimar LGBTQ life? Weimar.
Yeah. I think that it is accurate in the way that it tries to capture the spirit that existed in some of the Weimar nightlife, in the fact that there were places that even men in Nazi uniforms would have gone to visit. I mean, there's the end of Cabaret and is really really revealing, and in some ways I think that there have been some scholars, I guess, who have tried to argue that it was the sexual and political decadence of Weimar culture that actually made Nazi Germany possible. That somehow this kind of openness to deviant sexuality like LGBTQ identities is what ushered in the rise of fascism. And so I think that sometimes I guess it depends on what mood I'm in. If I'm watching Cabaret, I see that tendency, right, of that, there's this undercurrent of maybe the LGBTQ community brought it upon themselves by being so, open and decadent about it.
Wow. What do we know, if any, of LGBTQ people in hiding during World War II, and are those histories lost to time?
It is. I would say that it's probably unknowable how many queer people survived because of hiding. If they were good at hiding, right? Then they wouldn't have been found. And so, we do have, thanks to incredible work by scholars, mostly grassroots queer scholars themselves, beginning in the 1970s, who did interviews with gay survivors and lesbian survivors, and gay male survivors. And so we do have examples from them talking about, well, like, hey, I found my gay bestie and we just got married. And so lesbians marrying gay men, or just even, entering into these marriages of convenience. And so I think we do have some documentation of that, more so than kind of like full-on hiding.
Okay. Can you tell us more about how the LGBTQ community reclaimed the Pink Triangle as a symbol of resilience?
Yeah, so after... I'll try to make this brief. I wrote like 6 chapters on it. I'll try to make it very brief. Essentially, after during the 1970s, right, this act of publicly coming out was not just a personal choice. It was a political choice as well. There was this idea that in a democracy, any citizen should have the right to openly and freely express their sexuality without fear of being persecuted by the government, right? And so, in the United States and West Germany, gay activists essentially began claiming gay symbols and wearing gay symbols so that they could publicly identify to everybody on the street, hey, I'm gay, right? Just by they would see this symbol. In Germany, there were all these questions about, well, in New York, they're wearing the lambda. Should we wear their lambda? No one knew what that meant, at least in the German context. They said, well, maybe we should wear a crossed out paragraph 175. And they said, well, that's really too specific on one law. We need something more broad. And so in March of 1972, their very first autobiography by a gay concentration camp survivor was published. It was published under a pseudonym, but the title was The Men with the Pink Triangle. And so suddenly that inspired these activists. They were like, this is going to be our symbol, right? Because they knew that to West Germans, they would instantly recognize it as a concentration camp symbol, and they would be forced with the reality that their own history wasn't really in the past yet. And so this was a very public reclaiming of a symbol, but also a reclaiming of an identity, saying that the original Pink Triangle was meant, that classified being gay as criminal, as being worth punish, but we're going to wear this with pride. We're not going to be ashamed of wearing this identity any longer.
Let's see. Before our final question, one of the things that you spoke about, Jake, that stood out to me was talking about fascism and how it doesn't just live with the ruler, but it's perpetrated by the people. And it was so alarming to see the numbers of, citizens, that the majority of the people that were arrested had been turned in by citizens. And I just want to take an editorial minute to tell people that's what our museum works to fight. It's the majority of people during World War II and the Holocaust were perpetrators or collaborators. It's very hard to be an upstander, but we hope that I really hope that people heard that and will think about it, because we need to all stand firm.
Absolutely, thank you.
Okay, final question. What gives you hope today that LGBTQ rights will be protected and celebrated for years to come? There's some reason to be afraid, but there are things to be hopeful about too.
Is there?
Yeah, I know.
No, I as a historian, I'm always very cynical.
Well, maybe what gives you hope in general then?
I know.
Yeah.
As a gay man, right, who grew up in rural South Georgia and would have never imagined being right here talking about this, right? Of being married to a man, and we have a beautiful 3-year-old, right? There has been immense progress. However, this history does show us that progress is always fragile. Right? We went from the Weimar Republic to the Nazi regime in a matter of weeks. And to me, I think what might give us hope is that we do have the benefit of hindsight. We have these historical lessons that we can look back to. And I think the main thing that gives me, when I allow myself to hope, is that in 1920s, 1930s Germany, there were no queer allies. There were no allies, so to speak, right? There were no allies to the Jewish community either. But that's, I think, has changed today. That's one of the things that I think is different in 2024 America than 1920s Germany, is that there is hopefully enough allies beyond the LGBTQ community that understand the importance of working very actively to identify and protect the rights that the LGBTQ community needs and deserves.
That's right. Amen.
Thank you.
Yeah. Jake, thank you so much.
Thank you all so much.
Jake will be signing his books in the lobby. So if you bought one or if you brought one with you, please go and have him sign it. And thank you all so much for being here tonight. We really appreciate it. Go vote if you haven't voted.
Yes, go vote.